there, Libromaniacs. Welcome back. We're talking books today, and we're going to get into the subject of superorganisms and eusocial behavior. Interestingly, the human species, you can learn the most about it by not studying our closest relatives, chimpanzees, orangutans, the great apes, bonobos. None of those are eusocial species. None of those are superorganisms, even though they are our closest relatives. However, ants, termites, bees, wasps, these are all examples of species that are known to practice eusocial behavior. They are known to form what is called a superorganism, where all the individuals band together to the greater good, and they overcome the competition of nature paradoxically by cooperation. And Edward O. Wilson, he is a Pulitzer Prize winning biologist who is also a prolific author, and one of his books, Genesis, the Deep Origin of Societies, gets into the 17 lines of species that are known to practice eusocial behavior and form superorganisms. And in one of the chapters, he discusses the great transitions of evolution. These great transitions, there are 5 or 6 of them, and they mark important evolutionary, like essentially catalysts, where an entire new, paradigm is happening before, like at that point. And the first great transition obviously is non-living matter becomes living organic matter. That is the first great transition, and we don't know very much about that transition because it happened so long ago, and under such like recreating forces like that would be we're a long ways from having the technology to do that sort of thing. And there is some basic theories. The primordial soup theory everyone's heard about, less popular, but actually is the new consensus, is the origin from clay theory, that the first nucleotides, these chains of nucleic acids start forming. They because of the properties of clay with certain within, if they have traces of certain metals in them, these clays can get these crystals going, and these polypeptide chains start forming and whatnot, and basically you get the first proto strands of DNA. So that's the first great transition. We do not know much about it. There is also a theory of interstellar dust clouds is where that first happened. So some people think life first arose in water with the primordial soup. Some people think it arose in clay, so on Earth, moist Earth though. And then some people think it formed in outer space in these clouds of dust. That is where life first arose. Wherever it happened, that was the first major transition. The second major transition is from basically bacterium to eukaryotic cells. So there's this level of complexity that's like one magnitude of order difference. Like eukaryotic cells are much more specialized. The third major transition was the invention of sexual reproduction as opposed to asexual reproduction. That started creating this variety that was more considerably more resistant to if some pathogen is if some virus is attacking your organism. If there's more variety through sexual reproduction, then it has a lot more combinations to figure out, like genetically speaking. So there's an evolutionary advantage in sexual reproduction. The fourth major transition in evolution was eukaryotic cells develop into multicellular organisms. So these cells all specialize. You get stomach cells, heart cells, lung cells, like all the individual nerve cells and brain cells and whatnot. So everything starts specializing. And then the fifth major transition of evolution is the development of superorganisms. And I'm going to quote from the book here. The fifth transition was the assembly of individual organisms of the same species into groups. The culmination of this new step was the emergence of eusocial groups, defined as the high level of cooperation and division of labor in which some specialists reproduce less than others. In other words, eusocial species are those practicing altruism. The earliest known origin of eusocial colonies occurred in the termites, dating back to the early Cretaceous period, about 200 million years before the present. The termites were followed by the ants roughly 50 million years later, and the two together, the termites consuming dead vegetation and the ants consuming termites and other small prey, thereafter came to dominate the ecology of the insect world. Among the African hominin ancestors of the present-day human species, eusociality was most likely reached by the ancestral Homo habilis no later than 2 million years before the present. In that paragraph, I don't know as if I agree with the last sentence. Homo habilis, I would say we see our altruism begin with agriculture, where we have to work together as a unit. Like an individual person, if you want to go live on the side of the mountain and just grow your own food and have your own animals, that's you're not going to be very successful at that. That is one of the hardest things you could demand of yourself, because you're one person. If you had a family, that would be a lot, more division of labor you could do between the parents and the children and grandparents if they were involved. And then you can expand that even further with domesticated animals, with what you can do with, an ox pulling your plow, with, donkeys grinding corn on the millstones. So that's where you're seeing this altruism with agriculture, working together as a group, a large, superorganism. And I mean, I guess I don't even know what you would call one, that a superorganism that has all these domesticated species involved. Like there are some ants that have domesticated fungus and they've domesticated aphids. That's two animals they've domesticated. And that's one animal and one kind of half plant. So we've domesticated how many, plant species, and then on top of that, how many animal species? Like we're talking hundreds and hundreds of different species, way more plants than animals, but like there's hundreds of plants that we've domesticated, whereas the animals were under 100. But so I'm going to quote one more paragraph here. Cooperation among individuals in a group can be envisioned as originating and evolving by various forms of interaction. First, there is kin selection, in which action of an individual promotes the survival and production of relatives other than offspring. Those closest, the closer the degree of the kinship between siblings compared to cousins, the more effective the influence. Even if the altruist suffers losses, the genes it carries shared with the relative by their common descent are benefited. Most people are more likely to risk life and fortune for the help of a brother, for example, than a third cousin. Intuitively viewed, kin selection is most likely to promote favoritism within groups, but there are circumstances in which it could help to originate groups. That is kind of taking a selfish gene approach to this idea. It's like it started. It started with, well, I'll help my brother more than I would help a stranger. Because that's going to promote his genes, even if it won't promote my genes. And that may not be the case. That's how it's being viewed there. That's again another difference of opinion that I have, because I think you would see that in the hunter-gatherer level, like this selfish, like that's how you can get to a group but still be selfish. It's when you're this pack of hunting wolves. But if you are becoming a true superorganism, that's pure altruism. There's not a selfishness there. It's your entire species. It doesn't matter if it's your brother or if it's your third cousin or if it's a stranger. You know, your duty is to be altruistic and help. So I disagree with him on that there, but overall, it's an incredibly fascinating book. You want more, like you want to know more. Like his main Edward O. Wilson is most famous for his studies of ants, and but he also studies termites, and here he's getting into these 17 lines that practice altruism and eusociality, where cooperation is the key to success in the competition of nature. It's this evolutionary paradox, essentially. It's a fascinating book, and I highly recommend it. Genesis, The Deep Origins of Societies by Edward O. Wilson. Check it out when you get a chance. Thanks for tuning in.